Hi, my name is Jacob Cooper. For those of you who don't know, I had a profound near-death experience, or NDE, in September of 1993. Now, to preface, my NDE is a little bit different than maybe some of the other NDEs that you've heard through the internet or through books throughout the years. As my NDE, I was just the age of 3 years old, and a lot of NDEers that you see are maybe midlife or they have them later in their lives. But my NDE is unique from, that perspective. In future videos, I will get into maybe a little bit of the age, the soul age versus the chronological age of our bodies, and how sometimes there could be incongruency of the two. But my NDE occurred September of 1993 as a result of pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. So I'd like to take you on my NDE journey with me. And my hope is when you're hearing my story, it could allow you to remember maybe a part of you that is beyond this body, or maybe a place beyond, this earth, a place that we call home or the other side, a place of familiarity. I firmly believe that you would not be here today if my story or other NDE stories in some capacity didn't strike a degree of memory in yourself. And that's why I do believe more and more people are tuning into these NDE encounters. It does evoke a degree of recollection in a lot of people. September of 1993, I was an innocent child going into a playground with family friends. In these moments, I decided to go into the playground and climb on top of a ladder onto a slide. And each climb that I did, I noticed that my breath became more and more belabored and more difficult. At the last rung on this, going up onto the top of the slide, I began to just notice that my entire breath was totally removed from me when there was absolutely nothing for myself to hold on to. And I don't pretend to sugarcoat things, that this was the most traumatizing and scariest moment of my entire life, hands down, is when I lost my breath. And in these moments, I wasn't quite in my body, but I wasn't also crossed over. I was in this kind of weird incubation place. And I noticed that my body was, not functioning. The analogy that I often give is if you go into a basement and you shut off the power breakers, in the basement of the house, one unit at a time, that was exactly what was going on to my body. Due to the deprivation of oxygen, my body, wasn't able to function, as is most of our life, as breath is life and life is breath. And without breath, unless we're on some degree of a respiratory aid or ventilator, we can't cease to go on. But in moments from losing my breath, I was able to recognize that there is a whole different breath than the breath of the body and the respiratory breath, that there is a breath of eternity that I found inside of me that could never be taken from me. And in these moments, while I'm talking, it almost feels, and sometimes you talk about NDEs, it could evoke, trauma as well. And so sometimes when I do talk about my NDE, I notice that I might get a little bit more congested or have a hard time breathing. No matter how many times I talk about it, I go into those moments, right raw into the moment. But I noticed that I was able to exit my body because my body was no longer able to function. And when I was leaving my body, I was able to notice and to become aware of all parts of my body. And during this time, I wasn't only just aware of my body, but I was also aware of my own brain. And when I was able to see my brain, I was able to feel and know different components of my brain. And if I had gone to, Harvard neuro studies or whatever, I probably wouldn't even know what I knew. And I was just 3 years old. And the saying goes that we use a very small percentage of our brains in this life to process life, and there's a whole other degree of intelligence that we don't access, throughout life at times. And this really what I was accessing was this higher consciousness, what I refer to as the subconscious mind, and even tapping into later the superconscious mind, which is even a degree of awareness beyond the subconscious, things that we're not aware of in a way that at some degree that we are aware of, that we just don't know in this moment or maybe this lifetime. And in that moment, I became aware that my brain was being deprived of oxygen, and I just felt this large crack in half. as if you're in a storm and, just a lightning bolt just kind of hits a tree. That just kind of happened, to my brain, where it just, literally cracked in half. Sometimes I mix up thunder and lightning, but you get the point. But, and so once my brain felt like it cracked in half, I felt like my essence was just plugged into this body, and then my essence was taken out of this body. And I just knew at that moment that I was not my body. I was not, my 3-year-old self. I was experiencing all these things, but it wasn't the full totality of who I was. Who I was this infinite soul beyond this young age of 3 years old that my soul was experiencing itself. And in these moments, I was able to have a lot of the classical near-death experience moments where I was able to ascend on a beautiful tunnel, and I felt vibrations, and I felt myself rising a million miles an hour, as if you ever go to a roller coaster and you go on the fastest possible ride, and the speed is unlimited and the height is unlimited, and the feeling of good inside of you or the euphoria is unlimited. That's kind of how I felt when I was going to the journey onto the other side, or the journey to the innermost part of my being, which to me is forever intertwined to the other side. In these moments, I became aware of my right side of my brain, which I now know represents the creativity, where we get our wisdom or our insight in our everyday lives. And to this right side of my brain, I became aware of a beautiful palace that was so bright and so beautiful that I just had to shield myself, from it. And I became aware of angels around this palace, and its beauty was magnanimous. And to me, this was a representation or an understanding or coming home to God. And I view God as the energy which all of life emanates from, the all that is, ever was, and will be, where everything flows from. And it just felt like this endless apex of euphoria that wouldn't end. And I was going to the center point of creation and all of life itself, which in our vernacular we could call God or the center of the universe or whatever term, spiritual, or religious term that you're familiar with. But this went beyond term, but this was a familiar force that I was connecting to. And moments later, I just became aware of my own thoughts and my own concerns. I became, kind of worried as to what would my life be like, if I were to continue to live, as 3-year-old Jacob, or Jake as they call me. What would I look like? What kind of things would I do? And, what would my parents feel if I left them? I had still a degree of an attachment to this life, but I recognized that who I was not just solely this lifetime, but rather something that my soul was journeying through. And in those moments, I became incredibly comforted, throughout my concerns and worries and adjustment to the other side. And I became comforted by what I refer to as Christ consciousness, which to me, a lot of NDEers will see Jesus Christ itself in the physical form, but to me, this went beyond. I think all of us take on different physical representations, and we could portray ourselves, experience ourselves, in those physical forms. But beyond this form is an infinite consciousness of who we are. It's kind of like actors who take on these different roles, and in the theater of life that William Shakespeare refers to throughout different lifetimes. But beyond those different roles is an infinite soul or infinite consciousness, and that's what I felt. But in that moment, the best way that I could articulate the feeling that I had was an understanding of timelessness, how there is no time. It's kind of like chopping up air and water. In our life, we're chopping up air and water here, but it's comical to do that, from the spirit realm's perspective, because we understand that time is very much a human construct. And those moments, I felt the timeless understanding of all is well, was well, and will be well. And to me, that was the most comforting, feeling that I could possibly describe, that who I was enough. And, through the Christ consciousness and through the spirit realm, I was later really looked up at and not down at in judgment. I was really seen for who I truly was, not what I was doing minute to minute or if I was good enough, if I got the good grade, if I got the good job, if I got the good house, all these things that we attach to, and the identity of our ego, that it's a false sense of who we are. I was being seen by my real spiritual self in these moments, the core of my essence. And I had a great deal of exhalation and relief through that understanding. And in that moment, I was able to just remember that I'm okay just as I am, and I'm perfect just as I am. And life is perfect just as it is. All these things that we experience, hopefully will get us back to our true understandings, and the shakeups in life aren't there, to break us in a way. They're able to have us remember who we really are and to tap into a new gear in life. In those moments later, passing moments later, I became aware of all the people around me that went to the playground that day, and they're surrounding my body, which I was able to feel my own body, going down the slide. I became aware of my own, spirit guides, which we come to before this lifetime and we're contracted with. And these are, angelic beings, that are there with us from before the moments we're born until the moments that we go. And they are our primary guides, and they're there with us every step of the journey. And when I was able to see my, spirit guides, I just felt a degree of embarrassment at how I forgot that they were around me at each moment of my life. But also I was in awe of their beauty, and they were just the most beautiful beings that I could possibly describe. And I knew their names. It was a male and female, guide that I saw, and they knew my mind, they knew my heart, they knew who I was. And it was a terrific reunion, that I had with my own spirit guides. But my body was later at those moments, on the floor, irresponsive, to the calls, that others were giving to me, and I was aware of those calls. You see, my body was on the ground, but I was able to become aware of my own, spirit form, which was to the side of my body. And I so wanted to shake, each of the people that were with me at the playground that day and tell them that I'm fine, that I'm here, that I'm okay. But I became aware that I could see them, but they couldn't see the real me. They were just looking at my body, which I know is, is a vehicle for life, but it's not the real, was not the real me. It was an instrument, for this life. And, in those passing moments later, I became aware of the electromagnetic field, or the auric fields, around all of the people that were with me, that day. And I was able to see just these brilliant lights and colors emanating from all the people with me in the playground that day. And looking back on it, I just become aware that sometimes we monopolize or assign spirituality with certain, figures in life, and we say, oh, those people are spiritual, but then others aren't. And, it's kind of like if you squeeze each and every one of us out, at the core of our essence, is a beautiful spiritual light and essence. Some people embody it, remember it, live it. Others might have, rubbles of life overtaken that light, or their own human egos overtakes their own spiritual identities, which is a construct, that we develop throughout life, which, is a very much a human thing, but sometimes it separates us from the true reality. And it's a very limited perception of who we are with the box that we see ourselves in. And in those moments, I just became aware of just how beautiful each and every participant was, around me, and then instances later, I just was aware of my own soul family, which was coming into the distance. And I just knew each and every one of them. Again, that degree of embarrassment where I was with them, and it wasn't, to preface, it wasn't their judgment. They, and the spirit guides, were totally loving and totally accepting towards myself. It was more of my own feelings. But, it's, I always say in my talks, it's kind of like, if you're going to the military and you have this huge party and big catering hall before you go, and then a week or two later you come back, it's kind of like, oh man, you feel like you let some people down. You didn't quite finish the intended mission. And that's kind of how I felt, when I was coming to them, that there was still more left to do, and I had a lot more life to live. But in those moments, I just became aware, prior to those moments actually, became aware of, angels that were all around my body and were all around the scene. And these angels were, very youthful in their presentation, but they were incredibly beautiful. And they're kind of like a bronze, kind of gold color. And when I saw these angels, I almost had to pinch myself because they were literally right in front of me. It's as if you take a radio dial and just kind of turn it up a little bit. And just above this reality is our angels right here, right now, all around us. And these angels, different than the spirit guides, they were more uniformal in their presentation. They were more just kind of similar, whereas the spirit guides had their own unique characteristics. But these angels were uniformal in the love that they were sharing to myself and my body in those moments. And I just became aware of the unconditional love that they had, that they were there just to send and provide and give, loving, healing energy. And after seeing these angels and my own soul family members, I was posed a question as to, what will I do? Will I, stay in this body and continue, to live life as 3-year-old Jake, or would I cross over and, just continue on the other side? I would always be myself. It's just a degree of what experience, that I want to continue my eternal journeys on. And at that moment, I just posed a question as to, you know, what is this life like? Why am I here? And what will I be doing, in this life? What's my future like? And so in those moments, I was shown just a lot of flashing imagery of my lifetime and the different images and key points of my life that I had, and also awareness of how it appeared to other people. And this is commonly referred to as a life review, where when many people have NDEs, or when they do cross over, they have life reviews in which they experience their lives through different memories that come to portrayed in images and visualizations. But these are also experiences that we understand through the eyes of others and how we impact others through the positive and negative, the cause and effect of our life and how it impacted others. And my, life review did not just stop at this lifetime, but it also went back to several different lifetimes, in which I saw myself just literally spanning the globe and having just all these different memories and different civilizations and cultures and time frames. And the most recent lifetime that I feel, is closest to this lifetime, and I do preface a lot more of this, my two, best-selling books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, is a lifetime in which, in our world, we use the term commit when it comes to suicide. But as someone in the mental health field and someone who has crossed over, I could tell you that suicide is not a crime. It's not, something that we commit, a felony or offense, much like we don't commit cancer or heart attack. It's a choice. It's a death by it, but it's not, a crime. It may feel like a crime to us because we love our loved ones so dearly and we feel that they've betrayed us or violated us. But we forget many times when people who are, either struggling with suicide or complete suicide is the degree of strength that they have day in and day out to live with what they lived with, versus seeing them as people who just gave in and gave up. At a certain point, they were carrying as much as they could, and for them, they couldn't continue. And I experienced that exact realization in my last lifetime, in which I, crossed over and, due to suicide. But in those moments, contrary to what a lot of people, think about suicide, I was not put in purgatory or judged or condemned. What type of God would kick us, when we're down? I just remember in those moments just being unconditionally loved, accepted, and embraced, and a degree of healing that came over when I crossed over, when I went into the light. As when you go into the light, you don't carry over pain. You're fully healed, and transformed to your natural state, and all the pain that you carry in your earth life, is gone by the wayside and healed. And I became aware of how closely related the feeling of my NDE and when I, completed suicide, and in a sense of how I felt my back was against the wall and I was deprived of life and suffocated from life. And that's exactly how I felt in my NDE. But I knew that my NDE was a reminder, that sometimes in our darkest moments we could find the light and the power of surrender, and how when we're able to surrender to a greater force within us, we're able to remember who we are, and we don't have to do all this alone, especially when we're struggling and through pain. The degree of strength that it takes to surrender, to an infinite power inside of us from when our light is felt like it's taken away, from our experiences and our journey. And in those moments, I became aware of what I would be doing in this particular lifetime that I'm living. And I saw myself speaking in front of a lot of different people. And when I saw myself speaking, it wasn't like I was, some pompous guru or self-help guru that was better than other people and, just having people bow down to me or worship me. Not at all. I was just seeing myself just as an instrument, for messaging. And I was one with people. I was equal with the participants, but I saw the one energy that I had with all the participants that day, and I saw the transformation in the eyes of the people that I would be speaking to. And looking back in it, I just remembered that, the other side, is always there, but it doesn't have to be other of this side. The other side or the hereafter could be here now. And as Jesus would say, the kingdom of heaven is right within the doorway of our heart. It's right within each and every one of us. And I said, as beautiful as the other side is, that's always there. But this unique window to bring heaven to earth in this lifetime is something that I can't pass up. And with that power of choice, with the power of decision, all of my own, guides, angels, loved ones, left my immediate awareness, but I knew they could never leave my mind or my heart. And in those moments, I just had degrees of doubt. I was coming back into my human form, and I just kind of said, like, how could this happen? How will I know this will be true? I mean, I just felt a degree of regret, in a sense of turning down heaven and not having coming back down to this earth plane. And the message that I was left with was the power of our thoughts and how we have, each and every one of us, a blueprint of this life that is charted before we get here. And the more that we trust in that, in ourselves, within this blueprint, the more that we can walk in harmony with grace and ease. But the more that we doubt ourselves, the more we doubt this blueprint, and the smaller lies and the smaller sense of self that we have on our journey. And in that moment, all was left, and I was left on a hospital bed, and I had family around me, and I just was in a state of just incredible trauma to a degree, and a lot of other different intense emotions. And I had the rest of my life, to process the afterlife experience or this near-death experience. And each and every day is a different canvas to understand this experience. So the events never change. But as I grow and evolve, I'm able to have more wisdom extracted, from my NDE. Hence the title of the name of my book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, which is a reference to my name, a play on words to biblical Jacob, who was, running from his brother Esau, and he had a dream when he was running for his life and his life was threatened, much like my own life. He was able to have a dream of the angels going up and down on the ladder. And there's a lot in a name, and I think your name reveals your potential. And certainly, myself and biblical Jacob had that similar experience where I was in a ladder on a slide, and he had a dream of the angels going up and down the ladder. But each and every day is a different way to really understand my near-death experience, to process it, and to give over information to others. And so, for those listening, I hope that this didn't tell you anything that you didn't already know. Because I don't think that you would be here continuing to listen. I think at some level you already know this, as the kingdom of heaven and the other side is within each and every one of us. But it's my hope that listening to not only my NDE, but other NDEs, that it could be helpful. It's been my experience in working with many different grief-related groups, or people who are dealing with mental health-related issues, or people who are struggling with their past, that NDEs could be incredibly pivotal as it allows us just a different channel to view reality and to understand that we don't die no matter what we go through. And even our greatest fears to many, which is death, that it is indeed a fiction, that you could have death of the body, but never the soul. And so, this body that we have, that we view as reality, if you are able to break it down to the smallest microcosm, in the smallest atom, the smallest electron, it's basically nothing. So what we view as real, is really nothing. And so what we view as physical, doesn't even exist in a way. And so sometimes we have to reevaluate what we view as real and what we view as maybe not real. And in this life, I view as the dream. And when we cross over on the other side, to me, that is the ultimate reality, as that is what lasts. And all these things in this physical life have their time frames and have their seasons. And so, continue to listen to my videos as well as other videos as NDEs, as it can really remind us and strengthen the belief of the eternity of the soul, or rather, should I say, it transforms of a belief into a knowing of the eternity of the soul. As well, it is able to remind you that we all have a divine, unique purpose, and we all come from a divine, higher intelligence. We could use that in our everyday lives. So stay tuned for future videos in which I'll be giving over some of the wisdom from my book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, over to you, and giving some of the lessons and some of the rungs in the ladder for my NDE that you could hopefully use in your everyday life, to transform belief of the afterlife into a clear knowing of it. It's something that we'll live with every day. That doesn't have to be after this life, but it could be right here, right now in this life. I hope this video brought you great joy, peace, fondness of memory, and an ability to navigate your life in a higher perspective. Thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for our next video.